Hello friends, I am Chevee. Welcome to my shed. How are you today? How's life in your world? How's things where you are? I hope everything is good and great and wonderful. Everything here is fantastic, and I brought the Kindle today because we're going to talk about not necessarily a book, but it relates to books, and that's Stephen King. If you've been following the channel lately, and if you've been following the channel over the years, I've said some, I wouldn't say harsh criticisms of Stephen King, but I've said criticisms of why I'm not really a big fan of Stephen King. And to be fair, I haven't read a whole lot of Stephen King. When I was younger, I tried. My sister was a big Stephen King fan, and I tried some of his books like Misery and The Shining. I just couldn't really, it wasn't my thing. But I did read a decent amount of his short stories and his short story collections because I was really big into short stories when I was younger. But at that time, I was also really big into like Poe and Lovecraft, so I was more into this gothic stuff, and so the King stuff was like, I didn't really get it. And up until reading The Dark Tower, I really hadn't put a whole lot of effort into reading Stephen King. So I read the first 4 books, got bored with it. Then before the movie in whatever that was, 2017 or 2018, I read all 7 books. And I did reviews and I talked about why it just didn't sit well with me. And I've talked lately a little bit more about why it's been more, in my forefront. And I've really had to I've really got a chance to reflect on my thoughts about Stephen King, and I want to kind of backtrack a little bit. I want to try to roll back some of the criticism, because I get it now. It took this book, The Stand, for me to get it, right? And I'm about 85% of the way through The Stand now. My library, it's due back to the library in 2 days, so if I can get it done, that will mean I have completed The Stand in 2 weeks, and that's a pretty gargantuan read, pretty fast read time. But this book is just character, right? If you haven't read The Stand, I'm not going to spoil it, but it's a character piece. I don't want to say it's all it is, but that's all it is. And in this book, there's about 100 characters. I don't know. There's dozens of characters, and there's probably dozens of viewpoints. And this made it click for me, and I really started to have to think about why I didn't necessarily like The Dark Tower. And I've always come back to King's writing style. I've always come back to his writing style is really weird, and it can be abrasive at times because he just chops sentences in half and puts in these weird parentheticals, and he does some strange jumping, and it can be really jarring and confusing to the reader. It took this book for me to realize why he writes like that. And it took this book for me to appreciate it. And part of that reason is because there is something like 24 viewpoints in this book. And because the book is 1,200 pages, you get to spend a whole lot of time in those characters' heads. And that is exactly the secret, right? Stephen King's writing style doesn't exist. I mean, it does. His writing style is his writing style. I know that seems to be a cyclic loop, but the reality of it is his writing style changes based on the character whose point of view you're perceiving. And that's kind of the genius of it. And that's also the problem that I had when reading The Dark Tower. It seemed to be so piecemealed together. And the reason is because Stephen King writes, if you're inside of a character, he writes that character's portion of the story as if that character was writing the story. Not from this narrator's perspective, but from that character's perspective. And he writes, he writes all of those little random thoughts that run throughout your head throughout the day. He writes those in the book. Like, they'll be in the middle of a conversation, and all of a sudden there'll be some sentences about some, commercial. What? It's because that character is writing that chapter, right? Like, that's that character's voice. And I didn't pick up on that while I was reading The Dark Tower. And it really makes me wonder how much more I could appreciate the writing of The Dark Tower now that I know, because it was like, it didn't hit me in this book until about like 60% of the way through the book. That's when it really hit me and went, oh, he's writing these chapters as if we are literally that character. Not a person watching that character, but that character. He's writing it like the sentences that you know, their dialogue is obviously them, and a mark of a good author is when you can read lines of dialogue and you don't need to see, they don't need to put in tags telling you who said what. You should be able to just know, oh, that's something this character would say, and that's something this character would say. King takes it a step farther, and even the narration changes based on the character. And I think that's the problem that I've always had. That's the problem. I've never really appreciated his writing because it's really jarring and confusing. And that's my fault. That's my fault entirely, right? The reason it doesn't sit well with me is because I haven't adjusted to it. And not because the art itself is bad. You know, I am of the opinion that there's no such thing as bad art, right? Art is created for the artist, not for the viewer or the reader or whatever. So, I don't know. Maybe someday, for as much as this book has impacted me, it's impacted me in a lot of ways, and we'll talk about it as soon as I get it done. I'll go through the whole review as soon as I get it done, which hopefully will be this week. But of all the ways that of all the ways this book has affected me, I think that's the one that has given me the most pause, because I've held this belief that I'm not really ever going to be a fan of King. I've held that belief for most of my life, certainly for all of my adult life, because I just didn't get it. And now that I'm starting to get it, I kind of have to go look and say, did I not give this guy a fair chance? You know, I've often talked on this show about how I don't give things fair chances. I give it a shot, and if it doesn't work, I cut it off and say, well, you know, that TV show sucked, and I'm not going to give it its first season to warm up. Or that book sucked, I'm not going to give it its first half to warm up. Like, if you can't catch me from the beginning, I'm out. This book has not caught me from the beginning. But I'm powering through because I see so many people say, you have to read this book. I get it. We'll talk about that in the review. But for right now, I just wanted to talk about King's character work because I feel kind of bad that I've given him shit for it over the years. And I realize now that it was just me. What do you think about King's characters? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for being here as always. Thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing, being amazing friends and wonderful people. I really appreciate you. And I will see you again tomorrow. Today's word you should know to sound smart is decimate. It is a verb meaning to reduce something greatly to the point of wiping it out. Every doctor will allow a colleague to decimate a whole countryside sooner than violate the bond of professional etiquette by giving him away. George Bernard Shaw, an Irish playwright. Decimate. D-E-C-I-M-A-T-E.